Hello, I'm Sarah and this is Serenade Makes. This week, I'm going to show you how I made Vin's Obsidian Daggers. Vin is the main character from the novel series Mistborn. Mistborn is a series by Brandon Sanderson and I absolutely love it. I'm on my third read through, I think, and I have these gorgeous UK version of the covers. I like these a lot better than the American covers. A couple years ago, I made Vin's mist cloak, which I absolutely love. It was so fun to make, took forever, but I've never made her daggers. In the series, she carries obsidian blade daggers because metals provide certain powers to the people who can control them, so generally people avoid wearing metals because it makes them vulnerable to attack. So I made these daggers out of EVA foam and PVC and foam clay, and I'm going to show you how I did it. First, I measured the PVC handles that I'm going to use, and I wanted to make the blade about that long, or a little bit longer. So I drew out the shape of the blade. The style of the blade that I'm making is called a knapped blade. Basically, you take a piece of flint or obsidian and strike it at certain angles with a rock, and it chips off the corners to make the edges. So that's the style that I'm going for with this sort of chipped look. I thought about making the blade a little bit bigger, but decided it was too big and I liked this shape. Once I had refined the design a little bit, I cut it out and I folded it in half because I'm really bad at seeing symmetry. So I folded it in half so that I would be able to make sure that it was symmetrical on both sides. Then I transferred that pattern to some 6mm EVA foam. You can get this at most craft stores. EVA foam is a very common cosplay material because it is relatively cheap for the amount of structure that you can build from it, and it's really easy to work with. Then with a very sharp blade, I cut it out. Then with the proper eye and lung protection, I used my rotary tool to sharpen the edges. Once I had the edges sharpened, I went back in with the rotary tool to give it that knapped look. I focused on the edges first, and then went back through the main part of the blade to make it more irregular. After I shaped it, I hit it with a heat gun to seal the foam and to get rid of any fuzzy edges. It basically melts the outer layer of the foam so that when you paint it, the paint doesn't just absorb straight into it. Then I cut my second PVC to the same length. And I heated it up with a heat gun so that I could shape it a little bit flatter. I don't actually know if bones are more flat like this. I kind of get the impression that they are, but I don't actually know. I liked the way it turned out, but I'm not sure if this is actually strictly necessary. Once the PVC was softened, I could kind of smush it down and give it that oblong shape. Then I cut out little grooves because that is how the leather wrap will connect with the blade and hold it onto the handle. Now it's time to shape the bone ends. I'm using some foam clay. There's many different brands, many different kinds of foam clay, but essentially it is a clay-like material that you can shape, and when it dries, it becomes a similar texture and hardness to EVA foam. I shaped it on the ends of the PVC pipes and then took it off so that they could dry, because the more it's exposed to air, the faster it will dry. Although in hindsight, I probably wouldn't do that next time because they shrunk a little bit, but enough that it made it really hard to get them back onto the PVC pipes. Next, the leather straps. In the Mistborn series, there are these giant blue monstrosities called Koloss, and they have this craggly blue leathery skin, so I decided that Vin's blades were wrapped with Koloss leather. So I painted my fake leather blue. I took the blades outside to spray them down with a rubber sealant. This keeps the blades flexible even once there's a layer of paint on them. I applied a few coats and let it dry overnight. The next day, I spray painted them with some high gloss spray paint. I attached the foam clay bone ends to the PVC pipes, and I attached them using contact cement. Normally, you would want to let contact cement dry on both sides before you attach them, but since they were already a struggle to put on, I needed the wiggle room to be able to attach them, so I didn't let it dry out before I put them together. Then I cut the leather into strips. Next, I used my rotary tool to smooth down the transition between the clay and the foam. You can still see it a little bit, but since this will be wrapped in leather, it's not that important. Once the bones were fully shaped, I painted them with some chalk paint. I used chalk paint instead of the other acrylics because I wanted this to have a very matte bone-like finish. Now, I didn't actually read the directions before I spray painted this and ended up spraying it too thick. I thought that if I sprayed it to where it was a thick glossy coat as it was drying, it would stay that way, but it ended up being very bubbly. I'd initially planned to sand down that bubbly texture and spray paint it again, but I ended up really liking the way that it looked. I think it looks more like stone this way. So I kept it. Once the blades were sanded down, it was time to attach them. I just used some hot glue inside the PVC and shoved the tang of the blade inside. I wrapped the handles with the blue leather strips, but it covered up too much of the handle for me, so I ended up cutting the strips in half so that I could have a thinner strip. I used a dab of glue to attach the leather and wrapped the handles, making sure to go over those notches that I created earlier. And then a dab of hot glue at the end. Once the daggers were fully assembled, it was time to add the weathering. I used a combination of brown, black, and red paints to make it dirty and a little bloody. And then I went back in certain spots with some white paint to brighten up the bone a little bit. After the initial weathering coat, I went back and added some bloody fingerprints because these daggers have been used. I really love these daggers. They look so cool. Now, if you wanted to make these, you wouldn't necessarily need to make them obsidian daggers. You can make the texture of the top very smooth and make them regular metal daggers. They don't have to be bones at the end. I think you can use this technique in a variety of ways to make yourself some daggers. I hope you enjoyed watching this. If you end up making these, please tag me on social media. I am on Twitter @SerenadeMakes, and I stream live on Twitch every Thursday @SerenadeMakes. I'm currently doing the 100 Baby Challenge in Sims 4.
You don't need to do whatever it is with your child. You need to flirt with this man so that you can have another child.
It is a great time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye!